Hello and welcome to our talk on paradoxes in blockchain deployment. My name is Birgit Altrichter. I'm a lecturer at Surrey Business School and I will be presenting some work that emerged in collaboration with Professor Glenn Perry at the EPSRC Center for the Decentralized Digital Economy, DECADE. Starting off with a definition of paradox theory, paradoxes are defined as phenomena that are contradictory. They appear rational in isolation but illogical in combination. Some authors have also found synonyms for paradoxes and described them as tensions, and they can be inherent and socially constructed. One very well established and well-known paradox is the personalization privacy paradox, which basically describes this notion of consumers not wanting to share too much of their personal information, for example, with retailers, but at the same time they want to have benefit of a personalized offer, which then creates a paradoxical tension between personalization and privacy. Now, there are two streams of work we would like to present in our talk today. The first one is the contested space of paradoxes. This research aimed to identify paradoxical tensions in the context of distributed ledger technologies. We were guided by three main research questions. So first, we aimed to identify paradoxes in the context of distributed ledger technologies, but we also tried to explore why these paradoxes emerge in that context. Secondly, we aim to conceptualize common characteristics of paradoxes and the boundaries of paradox theory. And finally, we also investigated the underpinning ontological assumptions of paradox and how and to what extent they apply in a rapidly changing technology context, such as distributed ledger technologies. Our research was guided by two studies. We started off with expert interviews, interviewing 21 experts in academia and industry, which was followed by a Delphi study to ensure completeness of the findings and get deeper understanding of our data. We identified 8 paradoxical tensions drawing on these 21 expert interviews and 2 rounds of Delphi, which I would like to present very briefly in detail. Starting off with the first paradoxical tension we have identified related to immutability, which describes a tension between the GDPR regulation stating that every individual has a right to be forgotten and data stored on blockchain, which by nature is immutable. We also found a tension between the trust and distrust in the trusted system, where there are claims that data stored on distributed ledgers to be more trusted, whereas it can be questions whether that in reality really should be the case. We also found a tension related to the sustainability, as in particular proof of work systems require enormous computing power, while at the same time distributed ledger technologies can be used to create more sustainable supply chains. We found a highly debated tension around the centralized decentralization, as there is a proposed benefit of the lack of a central institution in DLT, but at the same time there must be some institution or somebody who holds design authority over the code and also the mechanisms in place for them to be trusted. So we find there is a tension between those as well. Pseudo-anonymity describes a tension between individuals' names being replaced by public keys. But at the same time, cryptocurrency wallet IDs tend to have IDs and therefore they can be traced back to individuals. The tension around inaccessibility relates to the fact that DLTs were created to avoid too much institutional and centralized power, while at the same time some people may be excluded due to a lack of accessibility or technological capabilities. Finally, we found unique ubiquity relating in particular to tensions related to NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which claim to be scarce, but at the same time, there may be another NFT created relating to the same information on a different blockchain, and therefore in reality they may not be as scarce as they appear. And finally, we identified a misrepresentation paradoxical tension, which relates firstly to smart contracts, which in reality we found are neither particularly smart nor necessarily contractual agreements. And finally, also the fact that values can be embedded in currencies on DLTs. So, for example, a green coin could support only purchases of products and services that are produced sustainably. But at the same time, such values inclusive criteria are by definition also exclusive. I would like to conclude with the theoretical contributions that this work emerged with. So, paradox theory provides a framework for understanding contradictory phenomena. However, paradoxes are often presented as binary. And we found that in practice, paradox theory requires greater nuance. We have to take a more nuanced approach to understand paradoxical tensions. The social construction element of paradox is very important, in particular in technology and social change contexts. Technology can both create and attempt to potentially resolve paradoxes. And we also found that there are increasingly complex business environments that are also related to the nature of paradoxes. And as mentioned previously, the centralization-decentralization paradox was highly debated through all of the expert interviews and also the 2 rounds of Delphi. So we continued this work with a second piece, and we took this centralization-decentralization paradox into the context of supply chains. Now we see that there are many globally recognized firms such as Walmart, Maersk and Volkswagen that have adopted blockchain technology to track goods and materials through their supply chains, which absolutely makes sense because of the immutable nature of data stored on a blockchain. But we find that there is a tension between the decentralized technology and the centralized nature of supply chains. And we also found that, for example, Maersk then failed to deploy blockchain because they themselves controlled the blockchain. So questions remain here regarding the ability of blockchain to overcome such issues of supply chain complexity. So with this work, we aimed to explore and to conceptualize the dimensions of the centralization-decentralization paradox and examine the consequences for supply chain complexity. We were guided by 2 main research questions. First, how the dimensions of the centralization-decentralization paradox of blockchain implementation in supply chains can be conceptualized. And secondly, what are the consequences for supply chain complexity? There was a preliminary study to identify the decentralizing paradox as one of the key dimensions. And then we followed up with 2 rounds of Delphi studies that reflects feedback from 35 academic and industry experts. And I would like to present some of the findings from these 2 rounds of Delphi studies. First, we found that there is a lack of a clear definition of what decentralization even means. So there are many people talk about decentralization, decentralizing technology. However, there is no clear definition of what that really means and what is exactly being decentralized, whether that's the data, the nodes, the mining, the governance. So there's a lack of clarity in terms of the definition. We also asked the experts whether they thought it was possible to completely decentralize DLTs in supply chains. And we found that the majority of the experts identified significant challenges that would need to be overcome to have a complete decentralization in a supply chain. Here, expert 18, for example, also described it as being utopian. We also asked about existing power and control structures, which may hinder complete decentralization. And we found that the experts agreed here and said that the dominant actors in supply chains and the existing control structure that are in place currently, they hinder such a decentralization. And often technology is then deployed as nothing more than a big central database, as expert 3 stated here. The experts also identified various technical challenges, social challenges, and governance challenges that emerge with DLT implementation in supply chains. And what was really interesting here was that all of the experts agreed that there was significant governance challenges. So while some experts did not agree that there would be significant technical challenges, and as we speak there are technological solutions to address some of the challenges they have identified, but the governance challenge seems to be one that is at the core and needs to be considered before blockchain deployment. We also asked the experts whether they thought that the centralizing tendency of distributed and decentralized systems could be overcome. And we found that there was quite a lot of disagreement on this dimension. And some experts also argued for a both-and approach, suggesting that we should move away from this binary conceptualization and rather see the centralizing, decentralizing tension as one that continues to be there, and that we need to manage the in-between. We also asked finally whether addressing the centralizing, decentralizing tension should be left to market forces or whether they need to be addressed. And we found quite a lot of disagreement here, as some experts said it should be left to market forces, while others argued that it really needs to be addressed in other ways, as expert 8 said here, markets are not rational. So to conclude with a few questions for discussion and further thought based on those two streams of research, we find that there are increasingly complex business environments and there is a requirement for improved effectiveness in supply chain design and management. Questions we could consider and we should consider thinking further is whether the centralizing, decentralizing tension in supply chains needs to be addressed, or whether it should even be addressed, or whether we should rather just live with it and have this constant pull from different directions and have this in-between approach. And if we do seek to address the challenge, how this can be done, especially with dominant actors in the supply chain who may hinder such an approach. And finally, we identified various technical, social, and governance challenges which then also need to be addressed before blockchain implementation, or if they cannot be addressed, at least they need to be considered before deployment. And that leads to the end of our talk. Thank you very much for your attention.